There's a moment in your spiritual journey when everything starts to feel wrong. Not just uncomfortable, not just uncertain, but wrong in a way that doesn't make any logical sense. Like your reality is glitching. Your energy is off. Your body is reacting without reason. You look around and nothing has technically collapsed, but something deep inside you has shifted, and you can feel the pull of something massive, something ancient, something sacred. If you've ever felt this, you're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not regressing. You're entering what mystics, shamans, and awakened beings across time would call a Dark Ascension Phase, a stage of spiritual evolution where your soul doesn't rise through light, but through shadow. And the signs are strange. They don't come wrapped in angel numbers or peaceful downloads. They come in the form of disorientation, disruption, and raw emotional chaos. And yet, that chaos is intelligent. That disruption is sacred. Because what we call darkness in our spiritual path is often just unintegrated evolution, the parts of ourselves that are stepping into a higher frequency by first collapsing the false foundations we've built our identities on. But no one talks about this phase. No one tells you that ascension doesn't always feel like bliss. That sometimes enlightenment feels like emotional exhaustion, social withdrawal, and existential confusion. And that's why I'm here. Because if you're going through this right now, I want you to know you're not failing, you're transforming. I've walked through this fire. I've been cracked open by it.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lessons.
And what I'm about to share with you are 5 incredibly strange but deeply sacred signs that you're being initiated into a level of spiritual evolution most people aren't prepared for. But you are, because your soul is ancient. Your light is encoded with missions that require shadow mastery. And this phase, this dark ascension, is how you remember who you actually are beneath the programming, the masks, and the noise. The first weird sign is that the things that used to comfort you suddenly feel repulsive. Your favorite music sounds hollow. Your go-to food tastes off. Even your spiritual practices, journaling, meditation, breathwork, begin to feel ineffective or even annoying. Why? Because your soul is shedding its old skin. The tools, comforts, and identities you used to stabilize yourself were aligned with the old version of you. But now, your vibration is shifting so rapidly that those tools no longer resonate. You are being forced to confront the rawness of your being without filters, without distractions, without the spiritual training wheels. And that's terrifying, but also necessary. Because in this void, you begin to discover what's real, what's truly you, not the rituals, not the routines, not the aesthetics, but the raw, unfiltered presence of your soul. The second weird sign? You become hypersensitive to time. You feel like you're being stretched across timelines. You lose hours in a trance. You wake up feeling like you slept for days, or like you never slept at all. Time starts warping. Memories blur. You remember things that didn't happen, but feel real. This isn't psychosis. This is timeline merging. Your higher self is collapsing illusions. You're being recalibrated to operate outside of linear constructs. You are beginning to feel yourself as multidimensional, And that's disorienting, because everything you've learned was based on logic and sequence. But now, your soul is teaching you how to move by frequency, not schedule. How to trust your inner clock, not the world's demands. And that transition? It's deeply uncomfortable, but it's the only way to access the higher realms that you're destined to navigate. The third weird sign is that your relationships suddenly implode or become unbearable. Not just romantic ones, friendships, family, business partners. People who once felt like home now feel like static. And conversations feel forced. You can't unhear the falseness in their words. You can't unknow the truth you feel in their energy. Why? Because your soul is no longer compatible with relationships built on codependency, performance, or energetic leeching. And so the universe doesn't gently ask you to let go. It rips people out. It creates conflict, misunderstandings, breakdowns. Not because you're meant to suffer, but because you're meant to evolve alone for a moment. Because in the silence of solitude, you begin to hear your true voice. You begin to meet your real self, and you begin to attract people who resonate with your ascended frequency, not your unhealed wounds. The fourth weird sign is that your body starts acting like it doesn't belong to you. You get strange physical sensations, pressure in the chest, vibrating limbs, sudden nausea, headaches, heart palpitations, random fatigue. Doctors may say you're fine. Tests come back normal. But you know something is off. That's because your light body is activating. Your energy system is undergoing a massive upgrade. And your physical body is trying to keep up. You're not sick. You're being restructured. Your nervous system is learning how to hold more light, more truth, more frequency, and it's exhausting. So you have to rest more, hydrate more, ground more, and most importantly, stop judging your body for reacting. It's not betraying you. It's shielding you from frequencies you're not meant to hold anymore. The fifth and maybe most disorienting sign is that your mind becomes your enemy. The thoughts get darker. The old patterns return. You question your worth, your path, your purpose. You begin to doubt everything. And it feels like a spiritual betrayal because didn't you already do the shadow work? Didn't you already ascend? But this is the paradox of Dark Ascension. The deeper you go, the louder the ego screams. Not because it's winning, but because it knows it's dying. Your mind is not breaking down, it's breaking open. And all the fear, shame, guilt, and grief that was buried in the basement of your psyche begins to surface. Not to destroy you, but to be seen, to be felt, to be transmuted. Because your soul knows you cannot carry those frequencies into your next evolution. So it brings them up, loud, raw, unfiltered. And if you can stay with them, if you can witness without collapsing, you begin to alchemize. You begin to remember that you are not your thoughts. You are the space they move through. You are not your pain. You are the consciousness that transforms it. And in that remembrance, you take your power back not by escaping the darkness, but by becoming the light inside it. So let me ask you the question that cracked me open during my own Dark Ascension phase. What if the breakdown you're experiencing isn't the end of your path, but the doorway to your real power? Sit with that. Let it burn. Let it rearrange your bones. Because if you're going through these signs, you are not broken. You are being recalibrated. You are entering a phase that few talk about, fewer understand, and even fewer are prepared for. But you are, because you didn't come here to play in the shallow end of the spiritual pool. You came here to dive into the depths, and to transmute the darkness, to anchor frequencies that haven't touched this earth in millennia. And that mission? It's not always pretty. It's not always peaceful. But it is sacred, and you are exactly where you need to be. There's a sacred truth most people never hear, and even fewer are ready to accept. Your soul chooses darkness before it chooses light. Not because it's broken, not because it's lost, but because it's wise beyond comprehension. You see, in the deepest mechanics of spiritual evolution, growth is not linear. It's spiral. It moves like a vortex circling inward, downward, through layers of illusion, false identity, and spiritual ego until it hits the raw, unfiltered truth of who you really are. That descent, that spiral into shadow, that's not regression. That's returning. Returning to the parts of yourself you buried, abandoned, or exiled in the name of being accepted, loved, or safe. And if you're entering a Dark Ascension Phase, it means your soul has made a radical decision to become whole. Not just bright, not just good, not just powerful. But whole, and wholeness requires nothing less than the integration of your deepest, darkest aspects. That's why this phase is so brutal. Because it's not about learning something new. It's about unlearning everything false, everything adopted, everything that was never yours to begin with. And the spiral begins to show you this not with gentle whispers, but with spiritual earthquakes. It shakes your foundations. It strips your identities. It reveals that your light was, in some ways, performative, unconditional, dependent on external validation. And it demands a deeper light, a sovereign light, one that isn't afraid to sit in the dark without needing to escape, fix, or label it. And this is where most people run. They get to this point and say, "This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what awakening is supposed to feel like." But here's what no one tells you. The most powerful awakenings don't feel like bliss. They feel like death. The death of control. The death of certainty. The death of the you that was performing for love. And so your soul pulls you into the spiral, into the grief, into the rage, into the shame. Not as punishment, but as permission. A permission to finally feel what you've avoided, to finally see what you've denied, to finally meet the parts of yourself you locked in the basement of your psyche, hoping they'd never come back. But they do. Not to haunt you, but to heal you. Because all shadow is simply energy that was once light, but got twisted by trauma, by fear, by survival. And now through the spiral you are being given the chance to reclaim it, to remember that your shadow is not your enemy. It's your exiled genius. It's your forgotten medicine. It's the part of your power that was too intense for the world, so you hid it to stay small, stay safe, stay loved. But now, the spiral is calling you to retrieve it, to walk through the corridors of your own underworld and say, "Even here I am divine. Even here I am whole. Even here I am worthy, and that's the real test. Not whether you can chant a mantra or visualize a light beam, but whether you can sit with your grief, your guilt, your shame and not flinch. Whether you can hold the pain without immediately trying to fix it. Whether you can stop negotiating with your soul and start listening to it. Because your soul is not trying to make you comfortable. It's trying to make you conscious, and consciousness requires contrast. You will not know the full height of your light until you've bathed in the depth of your own darkness. That's why the spiral exists. That's why it feels endless. Because it's not linear, it's layered. And every time you think you've healed that thing, it returns not because you failed, but because you're ready to meet it from a higher level of awareness. The same wound, but a new lens. The same pain, but a new breath. And the same shadow, but a new self. And slowly, the spiral begins to feel less like suffering and more like sculpting. You start to see the intelligence in the breakdowns, the sacred timing in the loss, the divine choreography in the chaos. And you begin to ask bigger questions. Not how do I fix this, but what is this trying to teach me? Not when will this end, but who am I becoming through this? And those questions shift everything. Because they move you from victim to alchemist, from seeker to sovereign, from fragmented to fused. And in that state, something incredible begins to happen. You stop craving the light in the way you used to. You stop chasing healing like it's a destination. You stop worshiping peace and start honoring presence. Because you realize that what you were truly seeking wasn't an escape from pain, it was the capacity to hold it, to transmute it, to be with life exactly as it is, without needing it to change to feel whole. That's the gift of the spiral. That's the technology of Dark Ascension. It strips you of false light so you can access true radiance. Not the kind that sparkles on Instagram, the kind that hums in your bones. That steadies your breath. That makes people feel safe around you even when you say nothing. That's the light that doesn't flinch in the face of fear. That's the light that doesn't bypass the pain, it blesses it. And so if you're in the spiral, I want you to know you're not lost. You're being found, not by some external savior, but by you, the real you. The one who has walked through lifetimes of forgetting and is now ready to remember. Not just the love, not just the light, but the wholeness, the mess, the mystery, the magic that lives in the places you once thought were unworthy. So ask yourself now, if I stopped running from the dark, what power would I finally reclaim? Because that's what's waiting for you. Not more suffering, but more sovereignty. Not more answers, but a deeper intimacy with the unknown. And that intimacy, that's what makes you unshakable. That's what makes you magnetic. That's what makes you a beacon for others, not by preaching, but by embodying. Because when you've danced in the spiral long enough, you no longer fear the dark. You respect it. You understand it. You carry its codes. And that's when you become truly powerful, not because you rose above the darkness, but because you rose through it. There is a moment rare, silent, and sacred when the spiral stops spinning. When the storm inside you begins to still. When the shadows you've been wrestling with no longer feel like enemies, but like old friends who were holding pieces of your soul the entire time. And in that moment, you don't rise as the same person who entered the Dark Ascension. You rise as something new, something ancient, something forged, not found. You are no longer just a seeker. You are no longer just a survivor. You've become a phoenix reborn through flame, reborn through fracture, reborn through the frequency of your own unfiltered truth. This is the Phoenix Protocol, not a set of rules, not a checklist, but a living embodiment of what happens when you walk through the underworld and come out not burned, but blessed. The first thing you realize in this rise is that clarity doesn't come from answers, it comes from integration. You stop obsessing over why everything happened and begin to understand what it gave you. You see the betrayal and realize it was a portal into radical boundaries. You feel the collapse and recognize it as the death of your false identity. You look at the silence, the isolation, the confusion, and you no longer label them as punishments. You see them as sacred initiations into a higher level of self-leadership. That's the real prize of the Dark Ascension. Not that it removes your pain, but that it gives you the tools to alchemize it. You become a master of your own energy, not by controlling it, but by communing with it. You start waking up differently. You don't dread the day. You meet it. You don't brace for impact, you expand into it. Because your nervous system has been recalibrated to hold more chaos without collapsing. Your heart has been opened wide enough to feel grief and grace in the same breath. And your mind doesn't run wild like it used to. It becomes a servant of your soul, not the master of your fate. That's the power of integration. And from that clarity, purpose begins to rise, not from the ego, but from the earth of your being. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and instead ask, "What wants to move through me today?" That subtle shift changes everything. Your life becomes less about achievement and more about alignment. Less about performing, more about embodying. And from that embodiment, you begin to attract, not because you're manifesting from lack, but because you're vibrating from truth. You see, when you've walked through your own hell, you don't need to prove your worth anymore. You don't need stage lights or applause. You don't need validation to feel seen. Because you've already witnessed yourself in your rawest, realest form. And in that witnessing, you've remembered something most people never do. Your soul is sovereign. It doesn't need saving. It doesn't need fixing. It just needs space. Space to breathe. Space to express. Space to exist without being edited. And once you give it that space consistently, fiercely, lovingly, it begins to speak again. Not in words, in signals, in synchronicities, in sensations. You begin to live from the inside out, and suddenly the world bends to meet your frequency, not because you demanded it, but because you aligned with it. That's why the phoenix doesn't rise with noise. It rises with precision. It doesn't need to scream its truth, it radiates it. It doesn't chase love, it becomes a field of resonance so pure that only those vibrating at that level can enter. That's what you're becoming. And yes, you'll still feel the occasional echo of the dark. That's normal. That's necessary. But now you know how to meet it. You don't collapse. You converse. You don't spiral, you stabilize. You don't question your worth, you remember it. That's the difference between someone stuck in a dark night and someone who has mastered the Phoenix Protocol. It's not that the challenges disappear, it's that you've become the version of yourself who no longer fears them. And from here, everything changes. Not overnight, not in some dramatic spiritual climax, but in subtle, steady ways. Your relationships deepen not because you're more agreeable, but because you're more authentic. Your work becomes magnetic not because you hustle harder, but because you're finally doing what your soul chose this incarnation for. Your body begins to heal not because the symptoms vanished, but because your nervous system no longer believes it's in constant danger. Your energy field begins to glow not because you're trying to be high vibe, but because you no longer betray yourself to be liked. That's the real ascension. Not floating away into some fifth-dimensional fantasy, but rooting so deeply into your truth that you become unshakable in any dimension. So let me ask you a final question, one that only the Phoenix within you can answer. Now that you've seen what you're capable of surviving, what are you finally ready to create? Not from fear, not from urgency, but from wholeness, from power, from purpose. Because the world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more embodied ones. People who've walked through their fire and emerged with frequency. People who don't just preach light, but who carry it because they've earned it. You are that person. You are that bridge. You are the living transmission of everything you once sought in others. And the moment you fully own that everything you've lost, everything you've released, everything you've endured ceases to be a burden, it becomes your blueprint. So rise. Not because it's time to escape the shadows, but because it's time to bless them. Rise not as a victim of the void, but as the voice that emerged from it. Rise not to prove anything, but to remember everything. And in your rising, may you remind the rest of us that it is possible to fall apart with grace, to descend with dignity, and to ascend with fire in your bones and peace in your eyes. This is your Phoenix moment, and you're ready.